Hello everyone, this is finally Waterline Strikes Again, and today me, Philip Sabactavian, and my dear colleague Arthur Evin are going to talk about probably the hottest and the most important topics about our game for the very, very long time, Submarines.
So, as you may know, we had announced Submarines not too far ago at Gamescom, and we've told you already about the testing stages. The first testing stage, Super Test, is already ongoing and almost over. Next testing stage that we're going to go to is going to be a progressively open beta test for the class. We're going to invite more and more people to that with the aim of polishing the build before adding it as a separate game mode to the game client, where we'll be testing it for a fairly long period of time, which will allow us to balance it correctly until introducing it to all of the major game modes that you currently know and love. All of this will give us a lot of time to really test out all of the kinks and give everybody a chance to try out and to give feedback for this new class in the game.
So right now we're arriving at beta test stage, and what's the most important is that if you want to take part, you need to find the latest news on the portal, and by the way, the link to this news in the description of this video, and basically just press the I want to participate button, and that will leave your application with us. So we are going to let the players in small groups, and what's interesting, we'll be concentrating on tier 6 for now, because we don't want to spread our efforts. We want to make one tier right for a start. And also, this beta testing will be conducted in several prime times. You will know about this from the further news. So we can concentrate a lot of players at one time, and we have enough people to test both submarines and other classes that will counter them. And of course, while the most important reward for the testing is the exclusive opportunity to test the new class among the first ranks of players, you will also be able to earn some pleasant bonuses for your main account.
So after Gamescom, we've obviously been following the community sentiment and the discussions, and we've kind of put down some of the major points that we wanted to take the time to address already now. One of them is about the speed of submarines. So obviously during the streams and in the videos you saw that submarines are quite a bit faster than they maybe historically were. You have to understand that this is done mostly for gameplay purposes. There is a specific way that submarines need to move in the game in order to be effective and in order to fulfill some of the roles that we will try to assign to them within the battle space. So we took a bit of liberties there for gameplay purposes, and we also wanted to kind of align the speed of submarines also with the speeds of other classes and in general with the speed of the game, where we have already compressed some of the timestamps and the flow of time to kind of make sure that it's not, a simulation style 2-hour engagement, but that it remains a naval combat action game where, the transitions between the phases of the battle and between the stuff that you do happen quite snappily and not with severe delays between that kind of stuff. So because of that, we're kind of going to allow submarines to keep up with the fleet, to go almost as fast as potentially battleships, both on the surface and under the water. At the surface to allow them to keep up with the fleet, under the water to give them the opportunity to remain mobile and to escape from tricky situations and from potential pursuit of destroyers. Because if we kept them super slow, then obviously once detected they would not be able to evade at all. And even with that increased underwater speed, it's anyway going to be very, very hard to get away from destroyers. While we kind of kept the very, very low speed, specifically for periscope depth, at least in the current design, which is going to kind of simulate the cinematic kind of way of engagements that submarines are usually portrayed as doing, where they're lying in wait, they're sitting in ambush and looking through the periscope, and because of that, it's going to also become a balancing factor and a risk factor for that kind of mode.
Yep. And despite this speed scaling, submarines still, their specs are not going anywhere. They're still our most fragile ship class in our game, which means that even with the scaling and even with these gameplay conventions, your main role will be like very stealthy and risky gameplay with a lot of planning and positioning, which will be the main core gameplay of submarines.
So one of the other points was about submarines having active sonar, and this kind of sonar wave that we've shown as being available after you launch your torpedoes at periscope depth. So the reason we did that is kind of to simulate and to convey the idea of how submarines were planning their attack runs, or how submarine commanders were plotting, the courses of their torpedoes while they were lying in wait and remaining invisible for their prey. So because that was usually an arduous and boring process, spent with some pencils staring over a chart, we kind of want to have that solidified into this kind of gameplay where you are able to influence your attack run as it happens while still remaining, hidden in this position, in this ambush position, and having the thought in mind that you have to manage your time as well and the risk factor involved with doing that.
Yes, and we basically get rid of this fire and forget torpedo gameplay style, which is okay for destroyers, but it will not be immersive for submarines.
Yeah, it's also a differentiating factor that will kind of separate submarines from destroyers a bit.
Another point you guys raised was the question about matchmaking. And while, of course, right now we're just entering beta test and it's too early to make 100% reliable solid conclusions, we can confirm that on beta test there will be like 2 or maybe 3 submarines per team limit. Of course, it's done to maximize the amount of players who can test submarines while keeping other classes' proportion in check for the sake of balancing. But as for live server, we aiming at 1, maybe 2 submarines per team currently.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Actually, having 1 or 2 of them per side potentially allows us to keep the dynamics of the battle and make sure that we have the right amount of influence that they have on the outcome of that battle. So one of the other points that was raised was why hydroacoustic search does not work against submarines at the deep underwater level. The answer is fairly simple. Right now, we believe that that would be too much of a hard counter to submarines, which will anyway be very much at risk of being, attacked by destroyers in various means, including destroyed by depth charges. And anyway, this may change based on the results of the testing when we see how the relationship between the destroyer players and the submarine players evolves and how effective destroyers are already against submarines. If it's strictly necessary, we will revisit this decision.
Yeah, speaking about depth charges, one of the most popular questions was why do we give depth charges only to destroyers for now? So there are 2 main reasons for that. First of all, while we are okay with making some gameplay conventions, and gameplay is always the most important thing, we would like to keep it historical, and historically most destroyers carried depth charges, not other ship classes, and even if other ship classes did carry these charges, it was not their main combat role. And destroyers were indeed, in reality, the main rivals, the main hunters for submarines. But of course, we perfectly understand that gameplay is most important, so we want counterplay, and we will explore other opportunities if needed. We'll see if it's needed. Maybe some depth charges can appear on other ships, or maybe we'll explore some features like maybe aviation role in submarine hunting, or some other game mechanics which may be necessary.
Yeah, we definitely don't want players playing other classes than destroyers to feel helpless against submarines, so we'll be making sure that that doesn't happen. Also, one of the questions that came up was why we're kind of doing this heavy amount of automation with depth charges and with this hunt for circle gameplay mini game for destroyers. And there are 2 answers here. First of all, from the gameplay perspective, we don't believe that it's strictly necessary to add a system with a lot of complexity to do this for destroyers right now. Destroyers already have a lot of stuff to do in the battle, and especially if they are going to have to look at the minimap and keep a lot of situational awareness to be able to hunt submarines. They will also anyway be doing all of the stuff that they're normally doing in battle, which kind of sums up to a lot of stuff that they anyway have to look at. So we don't necessarily need to have more complexity there. And on the other side, we're always also looking at how we can convey, historical facts or historical elements that were relatively complicated or protracted in time, which would mean that they're boring, into a compressed state that we can show kind of cinematically inside of the battle. And the triangulation of submarine positions by destroyer sonar, which would have lasted a long time in normal combat conditions, it needs to be done relatively snappily. So that's kind of our way to portray that element as well.
Yeah, and honestly, destroyers probably are the most complex class in the game already. And when we were making studio playtest, I remember I was asking the same question: why don't you let me click to launch these charges? But when you start playtesting it with real and PvP battles, you really have so much to take care of as a destroyer captain. So basically, you probably don't need to control another type of armament. And also, these depth charges usually had, I think, the reach of like 500 meters, so it's not like you're going to target anything particularly with them. So we're very happy to see that you guys were really excited for this new class after our announcement, and thank you for that. But of course, this is Waterline, so we should underline that you had main concern, and this is counterplay. Some players are just afraid that this new, very specific class can be unhealthy for the game. We will be very, very careful about this, and we'll test it thoroughly to make sure that everyone can do something in different game scenarios. And right now, if we recap, submarines are quite fragile. They are vulnerable in surface position, they're vulnerable at periscope depth. Each time they do sonar ping to be efficient, they will give out their position to the enemy team. They are relatively slow, even with the scaling. They cannot reverse fast, and they will have like limited torpedo range, so they will have stay close or medium range to the enemy. And all of this combined with testing, with further testing, we really hope to introduce like very risk versus reward class with thrilling gameplay, but at the same time, we want to make sure that all other classes, all other players will have some counterplay, and this interaction with submarines will be exciting for everyone.
Exactly. So taking that into account, please guys help us test them, and please keep an open mind. Remember, this is Waterline and this is testing, so everything is still subject to change. We will be taking your feedback on board and looking at the stats from the test servers to see how the classes interact with each other so that we can build the best interactions into the game. And with that, we hope to see you in the test servers.
And once again, please visit the news article, the link in the description of this video, press the button, apply to the test, and we'll see you soon on beta. Bye.
Hey!